So my name is Christina Sybil, and I am the co-director of the Entertainment Industry Institute here at CSUN, and then also the executive director of the CSUEA, the CSU Entertainment Alliance. If you are not aware of the CSU Entertainment Alliance, please check out our website, follow us on Instagram, things like that. We post opportunities. We also do a lot of panels and things like that for job training, skills, and things like that. We have a lot of partnerships within the industry for the Entertainment Alliance. And one of our most valued partnerships is SMPTE. And SMPTE, Society of Motion Picture Television Engineers. And they have their table out front information. I know that we are currently in the midst of forming a chapter here at CSUN. And so that becomes a lot of the impetus for this event to perhaps make you all interested in SMPTE, joining SMPTE. So we welcome their participation and their support, both for the CSUEA and then also obviously for the SMPTE chapter here at CSUN. So I'm going to introduce the evening and our panelists. And first of all, thank you all for being here, right? I find it extraordinary. And first of all, a very big round of thanks for Stephen Cohen, who rounded this extraordinary panel together, and whose work we will be seeing in clips on the scene in terms on the screen in terms of the documentary that we're rooting into, The Cutting Edge, which you produced. So this is a broad welcome and a thanks to our panelists and also to Stephen for putting this together. And thank you to our editorial faculty as well for helping and give feedback and things like that, Paul especially, things like that in terms of questions and all of that. So this is actually our SMPTE CSUN chapter kickoff event. So yay, right? And the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers Hollywood Section Student Outreach Committee, that's a mouthful, has been developing new student chapters around LA in 2024, and that includes CSU LA, CSU Long Beach, and of course CSUN, right? And tonight we're focusing in, the event obviously focuses in on the editor, who spends more time with the director than any other crew member. It's interesting because I was when I read that sentence, I was like, as a producer and somebody who works in development, I was like, oh, I spend about 8 years sometimes with the director before we get up and going, but I understand there's a very special and critical relationship between a director and an editor. And it is close, it is personal, and it gets down deep into the storytelling, right? So it is the 20th anniversary of the release of The Cutting Edge, The Magic of Movie Editing, which celebrates the art and science of cinema editing, and which was produced by Stephen. And several other people, deferring compliments and all of that. Oh, including Alan Heim. Yeah, so, and we will get to Alan in terms of his extraordinary career in a moment. Oh, and he is actually my first one to introduce. So we have a panel of 4 editors and 1 technologist. That would be Stephen. And our editors are rather remarkable, and I have the great fortune to introduce them. Alan Heim grew up in the Bronx, attended the public school system right through to the Film Institute of CCNY, good public college there in the city, where he discovered the allure of editing. Afterwards, he worked in several small post-production houses, where he learned sound and music editing, which served him well when he was drafted into the Army. Where he served at the Army Pictorial Center and became a polished music editor. Afterwards, he worked on several TV series and small projects, which led to cutting sound on theatrical films and later picture editing for Sidney Lumet. Alan won an Emmy for Holocaust and was nominated for several others and was nominated for an Oscar for Network and won an Oscar and a BAFTA for All That Jazz. He moved to Los Angeles in 1996 and worked on American History X and The Notebook. He is the current president of Editors Local 700, IATSE, and past president of the American Cinema Editors. So, Alan, thank you so much for being here. Terilyn Shropshire. Award-winning editor Terilyn Shropshire has risen to the pinnacle of the editing world over the course of her long career, consistently working on a broad range of films with the industry's foremost filmmakers. Shropshire and Gina Prince Blythewood, have worked together many times since Blythewood's classic debut, Love and Basketball, which has a dear place in my heart, including on the films The Old Guard, Beyond the Lights, The Secret Life of Bees, and The Woman King. Shropshire's storied career also includes a number of films with longtime collaborator Casey Lemons, the Southern classic drama Yves Bayou, The Caveman's Valentine, Talk to Me, and Black Nativity. She most recently received many accolades for her work on the blockbuster Twisters, which is kind of crazy thinking about that one editorially, right? Directed by Oscar-nominated Lee Isaac Chung. And yet there's more, okay. You would think that's enough, but it's a career. It's a career. Shropshire serves on the Board of Governors at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and on the Board of American Cinema Editors. Shropshire is a member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences and the Diversity Committee of the Motion Picture Editors Guild. She's the recipient of 2021 Sundance Institute's Adobe Mentorship Award for her commitment to supporting rising stars in the craft. She's earned dual Bachelor of Arts degrees in broadcast journalism and cinema at the University of Southern California, Terilyn, Shropshire. Thank you for being here. Susan Vaill won the Ace Eddie Award for editing Hacks, episode 1.69 million. And Hacks is one of my favorite shows currently on the air. It's extraordinary. She loves to edit both comedy and drama, especially music-driven, inclusive stories. Recent projects include the award-winning shows Quiz Lady, Abbott Elementary, and This Is Us. This is a fun fact. After her start as a double mint twin in the early 80s, that actually might be something you all need to actually Google and look up. You have no idea what double mint gum probably. See, there you go. We got one. Okay. And she eventually studied film at USC, assistant edited on documentaries, MOWs, and then the pilot of Grey's Anatomy, where she stayed and cut 70 episodes. Susan has also edited 8 television pilots, developed and led Bumped Up, the leadership workshop for new editors, and an enthusiastic advocate and mentor through workshops, panels, lectures, and podcasts. Susan is a member of the American Cinema Editors, the DGA, and a proud co-founder of The Cafe, which stands for Calling All Female Editors. Yay. A network Slack channel, networking channel with over 700 members, which is amazing. When they say they can't find a woman to edit something, there's 700 on one. Yeah, that's amazing. And then finally, so thank you for being here, James Wilcox. James Wilcox is a seasoned film editor known for his exceptional talent in shaping narratives and crafting complex visual stories. With a career spanning over 3 decades, Wilcox honed his skills at the historically black college, Clark Atlanta University, where he immersed himself in the intricacies of broadcast journalism and film editing. Armed with a deep understanding of storytelling techniques, he embarked on his professional journey with unwavering determination, ultimately winning an Emmy Award for producing a documentary on lip syncing in the music industry. Notable among his credits is his collaboration with award-winning directors such as James Cameron, Christopher Columbus, Mario Van Peebles, Tate Taylor, Chris Rock, Dave Filoni, and multiple films, Hillbilly Elegy and 13 Lives with Ron Howard. His work on the critically acclaimed series Genius Einstein earned him an Eddie Award for Best Edited Series Motion Picture for Television, voted by his peers from the prestigious American Cinema Editors. And most recently, the 2024 HPA Award for Outstanding Editing Episode of a Non-Theatrical Feature over 30 minutes, Ahsoka, Part 6. As a member of the Motion Pictures Editor Guild, the Directors Guild of America, the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and American Cinema Editors, he remains dedicated to fostering the next generation of talent in the industry, which is why you're probably here, because you give back. His passion for editing can be heard on the podcast Art of the Cut, The Rough Cut, Editors on Editing. He's been named by Variety Magazine Artisan of the Year and featured in the LA Times, Vanity Fair, Cinema Editor Magazine, and Cinemontage. His skill and creativity ensures that his contributions to cinema will endure for generations to come. Woo! Last but not least, okay. Our host, our moderator, Stephen Cohen, has been working in media for 45 years. He is recognized as a leading motion picture technologist and tool builder. He has been instrumental in introducing and deploying technologies like audio, video, non-linear editing systems, digital dailies, remote collaboration systems, digital recruited screenings and previews, digital cinema projection distribution platforms, and secure global file transfers. Stephen's passion is to develop tools for creatives, bringing their vision to market. Each film has unique challenges. Stephen works with producers, directors, DPs, and editors to develop global workflows that streamline collaboration. He's provided solutions for Steven Spielberg, David Fincher, Michael Bay, Tony Scott, Barbra Streisand, Mel Brooks, Brett Ratner, Gore Verbinski, Giuseppe Tornatore, Gio Dante, Joel Jaffe, and James L. Brooks, and Richard Donner. He has supported digital transformation across platforms and products for Sony Pictures, Miramax, Warner Brothers, Universal, Fox, and Disney. Some of the films that utilize Stephen's tech include The Mirror Has Two Faces, I'll Do Anything, Around the World in 80 Days, Milena, Panic Room, Deja Vu, Pirates of the Caribbean, Transformers, National Treasure, Book of Secrets, Rush Hour 3, and The Underworld. American Cinema editors tasked Cohen Communications with the production and post for The Cutting Edge, The Magic of Movie Editing. This project was a 4-year labor of love where Stephen provided production sound recording, post workflows, and sourced all camera, tape, and post services as donations. The film has won New York Festival Grand Award, Best Documentary, and the Fort Lauderdale Film Festival Spirit of Independence Award. It is screened at many film festivals and released on NHK, BBC, and Starz. Warner Home Video released it as a DVD and was ancillary materials on the Bullet Blu-ray. It has been used as a teaching tool at film schools around the world and has been dubbed in many languages, and I know it's used in our editorial classes here at CSUN. So thank you all. Thank you all. That was a lot of pages. That was a lot of credits. But we are so thankful to have each and every one of you in the room. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Christine. And thanks, everybody, for coming. I know it's late and you're finished with your classes. We appreciate it. Max, we're going to run the first clip now, so I'll give you 3 seconds to dim the lights. And if you can raise the volume. Good.
What makes a movie is the editing.
I've been in the business for, 37 years, I think, something like that. And I did not really realize what editing was until I was in the editing room myself.
There's magic to editing. Magic is a discovery of something new that wasn't intended, that works for the movie.
Once you start to realize that film is the sum of editing, then editing is the thing you're always looking at.
Showtime, folks.
I think great editing skill will protect a director from suicide.
So a little bit about the movie. The movie was 4 years in the making, 2 years in just negotiating with the studios, getting distribution, understanding what the clip rights were and things like that. I'm getting a little feedback. So our process today is we have some questions that we're going to go through the audience. You'll be able to ask questions later, but I have questions that came from some of the faculty here. And hopefully this reflects on what your interests are. We're going to start off with a question about AI. I know that you probably are using AI now, at least ChatGPT or something. So the first question is, how do you see AI affecting your job? And we can start with you, Susan.
I have not actually had too much interaction with AI in my job. I think the most interaction I had was on an episode of Abbott Elementary where it was a subject in that episode because the kids were using it. The most it's come to play, I think, is in speeding up workflows for my assistant editors in prepping dailies, and then primarily with ADR and looping. And that is both practical but also a somewhat ethical issue. I was cutting a pilot with a director, and they, it was they shot with a child, and the child's voice had changed, so they were able to take his voice when they shot and create ADR lines, before his change of his voice. Recently, I saw a documentary on Shackleton that was wonderful, but at the end of the movie, they had all incredible archival interviews with survivors that they shot 30 years ago. They took the voices from other crew members, and they said we used AI to create this voiceover from these, and I just I felt this little, ooh, okay, I hope those were their words, so that's the moral question so I'm staying away from it for now.
Thanks, Susan. Terry, you want to comment on AI?
Yeah, I think it's a question in process, honestly. I think that with any technology that we start to employ within editing, it's something that, depending on how it's used and can be used, again, with any technology in the world, it can be used in a very beneficial way, and sometimes it can be used in a not so beneficial way. For me, I think it's still something that is starting to, I think it's been around, it will continue to be around, and to the degree that now we're talking about it. I mean, AI was suddenly the word that everybody, talked about last year. I mean, suddenly AI was just something that, if they, how they have Time Person of the Year, I think it was Time's Word of the Year last year. I know that with respect to Twisters, I know that, again, I think we're starting to see what it can do in terms of sound, and helping sound editors to some degree, deal with issues of dialogue and interference, and I mean, to hear how things are being cleaned up now as opposed to how they were being cleaned up a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it's pretty incredible. My direct experience with it has been most lately within the sound realm, but I also feel like it's a word that is being allowed to be spoken. I think that in many ways it's being used in ways that have always been kind of under the radar and quiet and seamless, and you don't even know. I mean, something like a Grammarly, or, there's a lot of things that are using AI and have been. So, I think the more that it's being discussed, and now, like with Adobe and a lot of the companies that are actually embracing, talking about it as part of a marketing tool, will really become more aware of its scope.
Thank you. James, you want to comment on your use of AI?
Well, personally, I don't know. It's here, and I can see some uses for it. The jobs that I work on right now, where I'm currently working at Lucasfilm, everything is high security content. We don't really tend to outsource anything that doesn't emanate within the company. But AI, we're at a critical juncture because it was the centerpiece of 3 labor unions' contracts last year. That's the whole reason. Really, it wasn't necessarily about the traditional things like pension and benefits and wages and increases in wages. It really was the unknown in the use of AI, and what Terry was talking about, how it can be beneficial, but the downside of it is, does that displace human beings out of work? And so that's the kind of concern that we have for it. I can see practical uses for it. Like, for instance, temp ADR, when an actor's away and they're not able and the script is still being rewritten, and you want that actor's voice to be replicated to use temporarily, while you don't want to continue to ask the actor to come in and do temp voiceover for it, or a temp ADR.
Well, plus within their contract, I mean, theoretically, unless they're doing a favor, they only have to make themselves available a certain amount of times for ADR. And so you're usually saving that time for your final ADR sessions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in order to, it depends on the producers, the directors, and how they feel about listening to a scratch voice from someone in editorial or a sound-alike person or whoever it is, whether they're comfortable with that and whether that throws off the sort of flow of the moment of a story that you're telling or a line that needs to be read. So the people I'm working with aren't really necessarily rushing to use it. We've had discussions about it, and it's just been simply that. It's only been discussions.
As far as you know.
And Alan, can you comment on it?
Yeah, I can come in on it. I've been retired for some time, and I'm kind of happy about that. We were involved, when I say we, I mean my union, the Local 700. We did quite a bit of research on AI because we were going into the negotiations. We wanted to know how it might affect editors, and no doubt it will affect editors. I don't think in a particularly good way. The stuff you're talking about is excellent, but the studios, and we sat across from the studio heads and from various people in the studios who really are terrified of it as much as the workers are. They don't quite know how it's going to work out. I don't think it's going to be a great thing for editors. I think what's going to happen as far as pictures go, they will be able to make automatic edits basically as they come off the camera almost. But they will have to have human beings because AI is very bad at comedy. I've seen examples, and it really is terrible. You need a human touch, and I don't know how long that will last. And a lot depends on the audience. A lot depends on how much power a producer or director has to demand high-quality work. But we'll see. I mean, it's a really unknown thing. I think it's a bit overblown at the moment, but I may be way wrong.
Great, thank you. We're going to run another clip now. Here we go. Here's another clip.
It's about the story.
In many ways, we're the last storyteller. The movie has been written by the writer, and then it's directed, and then it comes to the last storytelling, which is in the editing process.
The last draft of the screenplay is the first cut of the movie, and the final cut of the movie is the last draft of the script.
An editor can take a sequence that a director shot and reconfigure it in such a way that it becomes a whole different sequence, which is much more beneficial to the movie.
Bob Fosse referred to me as a collaborator on his movies, and I don't think there can be a greater compliment for an editor to be called a collaborator, to really to have that function.
And now, a word about dykes. I like dykes.
How could you say that?
Lenny was a biographical film of the comedian Lenny Bruce, who was often arrested for taking language to the legal limits of where it could go in the late 50s.
The most wonderful thing that happened in it was near the end of the production. We had to show the film to the producer.
And the script for the film was the best script I ever read. But we were having a problem. We hated the ending.
Vaill continued. You're trying to stop the information.
Hey, look, will you please remove this man from the courtroom?
It was just not coming together. When Lenny is dragged out of the courtroom, his life is effectively over. Between that period and the time of his death, there were 20 minutes of material. And I turned to Bob and I said, why don't we just kill the son of a bitch? I took out 2 reels of film. And I went straight from, you can't stop the information, to Lenny's body on the floor. And that was about the most exciting thing I've ever done in a cutting room. I mean, we just loved that.
Great. Let's start getting into some questions about technology and workflows. Alan, I know you said you're retired, but your quote was, I'm retired and never worried about workflows.
Yes.
Terry, you want to talk a little bit about workflows?
I actually really liked your answer. I mean, I think that many ways, I think of myself as an editor a bit as a gypsy. And in a sense, I mean that in not a derogatory way, but in a way of that you have to be adaptable to the films that you're working on. And so I think that ultimately the film will dictate what the workflow will be. I mean, there's obviously certain things that you do as part of your process. Part of my process, my workflow begins from the moment I read the script. I continue my workflow. If it's a director that I've worked with before, it's often giving them notes, hopefully constructive ones, on any draft of their script. And in the meantime, be familiarizing myself with the film first as an audience, because I always say I watch the script first, and then I become the person who is going to help, facilitate the intent. So my workflow starts there. And so then there's the actual workflow that you have to start taking on as they start filming. And a lot of that will be dictated by whether we start with first unit. Often I have first unit, second unit, splinter units, and each thing that is coming through the cutting room, there is a workflow to get that material to me so I can start to watch the dailies, start to pick my selects within the dailies, and then start to build my sequences and scenes. And so I think every film, sometimes I'm in a situation where they've gone out and they've shot second unit first, and then first unit. Sometimes first unit comes and and so often my workflow may shift, because if first unit is shooting and I know that second unit's coming in a day or 2 days later, I have my workflow goes from kind of processing dailies to maybe putting together a quick cut so that second unit knows what first unit did. So I think that your workflow, you have to be very fluid, very adaptable, because often in production, you're always in service to the film, but during production you're in service to helping production get the necessary material that we need.
James, you want to comment?
Yeah, my workflow is very similar to yours. Specifically, a lot of the projects I've worked on are historical or biographical. And so when I get the script, I have to read it, and then I go researching, because I need to know what is authentic, what's the truth, and then what's been dramatized. So when we get in the cut later on, I can decide or help decide and influence and offer my opinion about this actually happened, and I think we should keep this, versus the parts of the film that maybe are dramatized and we feel like we're running long, so maybe that's an area that we can poke at to see if we really, really need it. But also, workflow can be determined by budget too, the size of your team that you're able to bring on. Sometimes you don't have enough people for the size of the film, and then sometimes films grow and they become larger because of the amount of footage that comes in and the visual effects that are needed. And you start with a lead assistant and a second, and maybe you need a second, and then from there you need a VFX editor, and maybe you need a VFX editor assistant because of the sheer volume of work that's coming in. When I was on 13 Lives, we always felt like we were just paddling constantly because the film, so much footage was coming in. At the end of the day, I think we had like 382 hours of film for what turned out to be a 2 hour and 21 minute picture. So we never felt like we had enough people, because there were literally days when we had so much footage coming in. Sometimes the camera was sitting there and waiting for a very specific moment, and like we'd have 16 hours of film. My shift is 12 hours. So and I'm going to take a lunch break. So if I sat and did nothing but watch dailies that whole day, that's my whole shift right there, and I still wouldn't be caught up. So there's that, and then there's other variables that, it depends on technology and how that plays in. When I'm working on Ahsoka, that's a completely different workflow, which we'll talk about later. I'm sure the opportunity for that will come up later with the clip that I chose, but that has heavy, heavy, heavy pre-visualization. So that's unlike anything that I've ever worked on, where not just one particular, like a big action set piece or something is previs, but the entire series is previs. So over 8 hours ends up being previs, and it's a lot that goes into it. So I think all those variables of the team, the budget, the expectation, what kind of project it is, where you're shooting, what the director wants to get done, all kind of have this sort of alchemy of what you need to do in order to get the work out.
Thank you. Susan, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I love that you use the word alchemy. I often describe editing and editors as alchemists and Renaissance artists because you need to be multifaceted and multi-skilled in so many ways. You need to understand story, subtext. You need to obviously be able to edit, but you need to kind of internally understand pace, rhythm. You need to be able to do sound design, visual effects, or at least understand how they need to be done. You need to temp score, go to mixes, color. You know, there's so it's just like it's like the full spectrum of the visual arts, and so you get to be a jack of all trades and sort of a Renaissance person. But it's a unique, I think, part of the crew and part of the filmmakers is that you have your hand in many pies and it's not just the picture. As far as workflow goes, I would say that my workflow changed dramatically with COVID. And working in television, where you're working on, on Grey's Anatomy, it would be 24 episodes in a season. Then streaming came along and suddenly it was just, 10 episodes maybe. And then COVID came along and suddenly we were all working from home. And what happened with that is that it reduced the interactivity between editors and the post team. And that's good and bad, kind of like AI, where it's very helpful. Like I had to take my daughter to the doctor today, so I was kind of glad I'm not working at a studio because I could just spend like 2 hours in the doctor's office with her. And no one's tracking where I'm going or how my hours are being put in. But I feel like it slows things down in some ways too, because I have to stop and, open up the messaging and email people. And, like my assistant was texting me while the post producer was calling me. And I was like, why aren't we just talking in a hallway, and not instead of this roundabout communication. So I loved being on TV shows where it's this real team environment, and big features, you get that too. You just get this wonderful team. So my point is that when you get started, try to take those jobs that are in person if you can. You'll learn so much more. Your contacts will be better. And that was the thing I would just say, like reflecting on workflow, is that it really changed the way you can network and the way you can learn how to do other jobs when you're starting and moving your way up.
So workflows for me was how to bridge collaborative teams from around the world. And it started in the 90s. And it was using technology to enable people to be in the cutting room who were not in the cutting room. And it facilitated accelerated productions and things like that. And then during COVID, it was the challenge of you have to work from home. And I was involved in building networks for editors to work remotely. And it was pretty bizarre going to an editor's house in full PPE. He would send his family to the back of the house. I would come in and hook up his Avid to the network. I'd go back home and then talk him through and talk the team into using the network. But it facilitated a lot of great work, and really our industry didn't really miss a beat. Within a week, we were still working uniquely, globally, and just in LA, people were not even traveling to the studios. They were working from home. I'm going to show another clip now, so Max, if you can lower the lights.
He must have died during...
He's dead. We were just watching the rough cut. Jesus, I didn't hear anything. Did you hear anything?
Not a thing.
Eddie, you probably didn't want to disturb the screening, Mr. Brady.
Today, not only is the editor still alive, but he has become the director's key collaborator. No other crew member spends as much time working alone with the director.
Finding the relationship with the editor is like trying to decide whether or not to get married. Because if the marriage isn't a good one, it's going to be a sticky divorce.
When I was doing my first movie, the only thing I knew is I wanted a female editor, because I just felt a female editor would be more nurturing to the movie and to me. I wouldn't try to be winning their way just to win their way, all right? They wouldn't be trying to shove their agenda or win their battles with me. They would be nurturing me through this process.
In the air! Kill me, man! I fucking got that! Hey!
I think editors play a big role with directors in giving them support, making them feel like they can look at something that may have trouble or problems and be comfortable enough so that they can approach those problems.
Hi, Vincent. I'm getting dressed.
In the beginning, he really doesn't guide me. And then I put together what I think he wants. And pretty much we've worked together so long I can judge what he would want.
The fuck is this place?
This is Jack Rabbit Slim's. An Elvis man should love it.
Come on, man, let's go get a steak.
You can get a steak here, Daddy-O. Don't be a...
Oh, after you, kitty cat.
Initially, I had it like really long. It was like a date in real time, all right? And it was sort of like Sally's job to kind of like, you know, little by little convince me to bring it down and bring it down and bring it down. And it still could be funny. You would still have what I'm talking about, but maybe it wouldn't be so painful.
He did want it to feel very much like a date, and it was very long at first, and we just had to kind of live with it for a while.
Just like, you know, letting me live with it long enough so I could eventually, okay, I've had it enough, I've seen that enough, okay, maybe now I can lose this part. Okay, so now it was like here and now it's like here.
Finally, we'd bring it down, and then I kind of brought it too far down, and then he said, we got to bring it back out.
That's it. No more, no more, no more, no more. This is not a video.
We do that for 8 months, so intense. I see him more than my husband.
And sometimes I, you know, get annoyed with her for not reading my mind 100%. I mean, all right, you know, it's not good enough that she reads it 80% of the time, all right?
We work very intensely together, and it's kind of amazing that we still like each other. If I was with my husband that long, I don't think I'd like him that much. So
by the time it's great to see Sally. It's unfortunate we lost her a few years ago. I worked on Kill Bill and built a screening room connected to Sally's cutting room. So as she's editing, Quentin could be in a screening room and watch her cut instead of sitting on a couch behind her. It was pretty cool. So Terry, you picked that clip. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I really chose that clip because it really speaks to, yes, the director and editor relationship, but even to me more so the understanding of the timing. I mean, as an editor, you know, one thing I say is that you always take pride in what you do, but it's something that you don't covet because it is a collaborative art form. And what I have found more than anything, especially when I'm talking to young editors, is that there's often a frustration when they start working with a director that there's a feeling that, you know, they've cut something a certain way, and, you know, it's very disappointing when the director comes and just doesn't tell them they're the most brilliant person that they've been, that's the most brilliant cut they've ever seen. And you know, and I think that part of the reason why I chose this was because often, you know, you have to be a bit of a psychologist as an editor. And when a director is coming into your editing room for the first time, and I joke, I always say, you know, depending on what your spiritual or religious beliefs is, you know, God, Shiva, you know, Allah, the Force could come and cut the most perfect cut, and the director would still come in and just curl up in a ball. Because part of it is they're coming from literally the war of production, what it took them to get to production and what they have in their head. And as an editor, you've been living with this material usually while they're shooting. So you have already gone through a lot of the, you know, things that you're seeing, and editors are solution-based people, you know, and so by the time they come in, you're ready to, like, let's do this, let's get this, and but you have to also recognize that they need to catch up to you often, that they're not where you are. You know, they're still thinking about the problems on the set. Oh, that was the day I had an argument with the, you know, the actor. This was the day that the generator, whatever that is. And so to me, that conversation really is about understanding that you may have the most brilliant idea for what to do, with a sequence. And the director may not be ready to hear that brilliant idea. And so part of your responsibility as an editor is to understand the necessary gestation that your collaborator may need to go through. And at some point you guys will catch up, hopefully, and be together. And and there are times I've said to my directors, because I've earned their trust, because it is about trust at the core of it, put the bat down. I'm going to give you a little time to go through what you need to go through, but at a certain point, it's like you got to put the bat down, or we got to get to work. And so I think part of understanding the responsibility as an editor, and I think of editors as a filmmaker, editor is a filmmaker who edits. A sound designer is a filmmaker who does sound. Everybody, but ultimately you're a filmmaker, you're a storyteller, and you have to be able to also understand in a collaborative art form that, timing. You have to learn about when is the right time to make a suggestion. When is it time to process what the director's going through? And it's, it's not just the cut. It's what you have to do to get to the moment that you make the cut, and that's why I chose that.
Well, before someone gets that opportunity to edit, for someone looking to get into the industry, what skills or capabilities do you think they need to have, Susan?
I think I spoke to it somewhat about the Renaissance mindset, but I also really love what you were saying, because it truly is such an emotional space. And when I was on the pilot of Grey's Anatomy, I was an assistant editor, and the editor I was working with was like, just take the director in the room and just go through all that helicopter footage with him and just get him out of my way. And I succeeded. And so then that led to him having me work with Shonda Rhimes on all the music in the pilot. So you have to build trust. So being able to build trust is just, it's so funny that some of the skills in editing, it's like there's AI, there's technical stuff. So much of it is, what are your emotional skills? Like how intuitive are you in terms of feeling the story, and asking a director, what's the emotional note? Like, what's the emotional goal that you want? You don't have to tell me how to cut it. Tell me what you want to feel, and then go away. Let me do it. And that's one thing also, just tying back to workflow, that's very useful. I mean, very helpful with Avid, is just saving versions, because especially in comedy like Hacks, they'll do constant line alts, but also, you're also solving a problem and looking for the solutions like you were talking about, and you can save all these versions. And very often, you do have to have that patience to kind of guide them on the path that you've already, jumping over the trees, and you're like, hey, here was my editor's cut on my first cut on this, and here was my second cut, here's my third, and you can show them how you tackled problems, and then it helps them get to the point that you were already at, a month before. So I don't know if I answered that question.
No, you did. Alan, do you want to comment on that and what someone needs to get the skills to get into the door?
We used to work in real rooms with real doors with other editors down the hall doing other projects. This is in New York and here in Los Angeles when I moved here. So there was always downtime when you were working with film, physical film. You were looking for trims, your assistant was looking for trims. So people would walk up and down the hall, talk to you, look and see if you were doing something. On Lenny, I actually hired 2 NYU students who had a class on the floor below me on Broadway, who happened to walk in when I needed 2 more apprentices. This is not something that happens today. Also, because of COVID and because of working from home, it's much more difficult. You can't also studios are really heavily guarded, so you can't sort of cold walk in. It's not a possible thing. So you have to make friends. You have to find out if you want to be an editor. You have to find out where editors hang out. Our union has mixers where editors show up, assistants show up, now even apprentices show up occasionally. We'll have a beer and talk a little bit. We don't do it every month, but we do it occasionally. You have to nurture friendships that will lead you to get ahead. What Terry said about the psychological aspects of editing, I've always felt that an editor is in a very difficult position because he or she is in between the director's vision and what the director really shot, which is often not the same thing. So I'm not knocking it. But you have to be able to point out things in the material so that the director feels comfortable, and it's a really important part of the job.
So, Alan, I think that you had some situation like that on American History X. Could you talk a little bit about that, or do you not want to talk about that?
Well, that was a very strange film. I don't know how many of you have seen American History X. I had been asked to do the film originally. I was employed at the time. Couldn't do it. I got a call from the director months later, and he asked if I was available to do the film, and I was. And I said, but isn't this other guy doing the film? And he said, yeah, but I've let him go, and I need another editor. Well, I sort of hate that, but I think it was okay. And we talked. We had dinner. The director and I had dinner, and I decided I'd do the movie. It's an interesting script. When I showed up Monday morning, the other editor showed up also. He had not been told. Oh, it was terrible. It was. We've become friends since, but and I don't think he ever held it against me. It's just one of the things that happens. But you might have been talking about interference from other people, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was an English editor on the film the whole time. The director was English. We finally, he and I, put together a film. There was a ton of improvisation, immense amount of material shot at 600 frames. Super slow motion. Tony Kaye, the director, he's quite an interesting artist, not only in film, but he's a great cinematographer, a visual artist on many levels. And anyway, he let the actors sort of run wild, and there were tremendous improvisational scenes that were deadly to cut, to look at the dailies of, to listen to. And eventually, we were ready to show the film, and I said to Tony, let's show the film to the producer at New Line Studio, the head of the studio, and before we show it to the actors. And Tony wanted to show it to the actors and to the writer. So the actor, Edward Norton, came in. You're nodding. You've read this, huh? Ed Norton came in after seeing the movie. And Ed, who was very bulked up for the film, and Ed is about 6 feet tall, I'm guessing. I'm not. And so I put my hand out, and he ignored my hand completely. And he said, you missed every nuance of my performance. Oh, I didn't take that well. So my thought was I should really rip out his throat. But this is not what you do when you're an editor. And also when you're dealing with a guy who's very buff, perhaps 40 years younger than I was. And, I didn't want to. But I also said, no, he can't come into my cutting room ever again, nor can the writer. And they didn't. They worked with my assistant. Edward insisted on getting his hand in, and it's a bad image because the director hit a wall once with his fist and broke his hand because he was so angry with Ed. Anyway, I'm not sure if that's an answer to your question, but it certainly is.
No, but it was a good story. It's a
It's a good anecdote. I really appreciate
more,
that.
I try and block it out.
But it's about interference and trying to follow what the director's vision is. And the director clearly was not comfortable with his vision and was looking for outside feedback.
Yeah, and particularly had great respect for the writer and for the actor. In fact, for all the actors, but particularly for Edward. So, yeah, Tony has a film that's, I think it's just been shown at the Rome Film Festival. He hasn't made too many films recently, but this one I hear is a good comedy. I'm curious to see it.
Great. And James, do you want to talk about any of this, or some original question was?
I think we all covered it pretty well, but okay. I will say this: the editor, the skills that I think the question was, what are the skills that a person needs to become a successful editor?
Successful in editing.
That's a lot, I mean, really, you start with having passion for it because the hours are long, and in the beginning of your career, you shouldn't be doing it strictly for the money because you're building up your chops, you're building up your resume, you're making contacts, and you're investing in yourself and your career, and you should be really kind of building up your craft. You should be working extra when you're not at work, when you're not being paid to do it. It's like if you're an athlete, the best spent hours are, if you're a basketball player, not when you're on the court practicing with the rest of the team. It's when you go to the gym late at night by yourself, early in the morning by yourself, self-motivated and all those things like that. But what Terry was talking about also is the political side of it, the therapy side of it, where directors, they need validation too. They shoot material and they're not sure about what it's going to turn out like. And, you know, you can tell that they're insecure about it and how you present it and when you present your cut and when you have ideas about what you think would work better because you have been with this material. And it takes a while and it takes patience to allow a director to come around to that, like Tarantino was talking about. And that can be weeks, that can be months. And then sometimes they don't really kind of come around until there's a screening. And the very thing that you've been just tapping on them about, gently, like timely in a way, about maybe we don't need this, or maybe we need a moment to build this up. It's not always about reduction. Sometimes you have to build stories up to make them work better as well. But the audience will sometimes tell the director in those screenings, the response, the note cards of what's working and what's not. And if the director's fair-minded about it, they should listen to that. And probably you're going in the next day and you're going to go, hey, let's take a look at that. The studio sometimes will make suggestions, and it depends on the relationship that the director has with the studio. Sometimes they don't want to take notes at all from the studio because they feel like they don't know anything. And then others, you get great executives who do really give insightful notes, and it makes the picture better. I'll tell you, for me, a little anecdotal story that really kind of helped me out, which was when I was in college, and like you guys are all really bright, I'm assuming, and just really want to make your mark on the industry. I came in like this hot shot, and then I was getting coffee. That was like the whole thing that I was doing as an intern, was just getting everyone in the departments coffee. And everyone had a particular way that they wanted their coffee. Bill liked his straight black, medium warm. Ron liked his with 2 scoops of Splenda and cream in it. And Jeff liked his a certain way. But here's what I did understand, that it wasn't about trying to impress my coworkers and these people with being the smartest guy in the room. What really they were looking for was just help. And that helped them start their day. It helped them whatever they needed. And so I quickly learned that, oh, you don't have to be showing these people you're the smartest guy. You just need to be the most helpful person. And listen and know when you're asked a question, be ready to answer it, and don't really kind of get in their business. Just kind of wait your turn. And they saw that. And I think the coffee, actually, believe it or not, was a small sample of a test.
Right, but the point is that they were watching you,
yes,
and that you took on your whatever your entry level position was, which to me in my cutting room, honestly, is one of the most important roles. Is the person who comes in and is supporting everybody else,
yep, with
the spirit of understanding that, you know, we know that you're not looking to be a PA for the rest of your life. You're not coming into my cutting room to be a professional PA. I get it. I was there. But part of it, what makes the difference is how you embrace that moment in time in your life. Because I know you're looking over there. I know you're looking beyond that. But what are you doing in the moment to show me that within the spirit of being in the space in the moment in time, that you understand the assignment as opposed and embrace it in a way that people are watching, whether you recognize it or not. They may not seemingly watch, but they're watching. And most people, hopefully in the healthy environment, when they see that you're working really hard towards what you want to get to, they want to try to help you get there.
Yeah.
They really do. I mean, yes, there are people, you know, who, whatever. But, you know, hopefully you're in a situation where you're working with people, you're working hard, and they see you working hard.
Yeah, yeah. And so I grew to anticipate everybody's needs for lunch, for whatever, and they just gave me more and more and more responsibility because they thought, this kid is a thinker and he really wants to be a part of this business. He's passionate about it. Whatever they needed me to do, I did it with great attitude. And eventually they hired me for my first job right out of college. They even bent the rules, and you were only supposed to have 1 year as an intern, and they gave me a second year and just told me, like, keep quiet about it.
I literally had an assistant that would tell our young people coming in, anticipate my needs, and exceed my expectations. And then you'll be right in the pocket where you need to be. And it's really, in some ways, true. It's like if you want to be an editor, then you need to think like an editor. You need to kind of anticipate those types of things. I didn't mean to.
We'll have some more questions like that, but I wanted to jump off on what Alan and James said about screenings. And an early part of my career was enabling people to screen on video when they, in the past, had to screen on film. And it's challenging to assemble a work picture. It could have problems with splices. It could have problems with sync and things like that. And I introduced a way to do it as a video edit. I had an opportunity to work with Harvey Weinstein on several films, and he had a movie called All the Pretty Horses, which was Billy Bob Thornton's directorial debut. We had our first screening in Arlington, Maryland, or Arlington, Virginia, outside of D.C. And at that time, Billy Bob's cut was 3.5 hours. In most cases, I've never screened a movie more than 2 hours and 45 minutes. But for some reason, Harvey let Billy Bob show a 3 and 20-minute movie. Well, at 2 hours in, 25% of the audience got up and left. We kept the movie running with less audience, and then Billy Bob was in the audience, and he just said, F you, and walked off the picture, and a picture editor assigned by Harvey finished cutting the movie. I've had many other screenings where we took the movie around the country for different demographics to see how the audiences liked it. It costs $30 or $40 million to release a movie, so the studios want to be sure that it meets their interest. Terry, do you have a preview story that you can talk about?
Well, what I would say about previews is, and it kind of is both the macro and micro of it. I mean, to me, the best thing you can do as a filmmaker, because you are making this film for an audience, is to sit in an audience with your film. Sometimes early in, it's always a good idea. Like what we will do is we will have, ahead of going into a preview, what we call a friends and family screening, where we will invite, maybe half of the people are just people that have nothing to do with the industry, just literally friends, family, people who are just audience. And then the other half will be people who we trust who may have, some involvement. Maybe it's a writer, maybe it's an editor, but they're the people who can look at a film and then be part of the constructive part of it. So that by the time we show it to the studio, or by the time we show it to people who are really going to have a say in what we're doing, we kind of started to work out what problems that we may be seeing. When we get to an audience preview, the best part about that preview is, for me as an editor, is sitting in the audience, listening to the audience, feeling the audience. You know what it's like. It's nothing, it's a collective experience, watching how people are reacting. Best part. Worst part of that process is when we get into the analytics, the cards, and then people interpreting what the cards were, or in a situation where you're now asking the audience to really kind of write down their thoughts, right? Which, ultimately, if you think about it, it's like if you go to a movie, if we all went to a movie, we might go out to dinner afterwards and we might talk about it. But then, over time, you will think about that film. And I think it's sometimes overthink about the film. But, all that information comes in, and then there's a person who's hired to kind of break it down, and really then it becomes numbers. And those numbers can really affect what happens in my cutting room as a result of what, the feedback is. Whereas some of the best feedback is the immediate feedback you're hearing in the audience while you're watching the film, even while they immediately start talking about it afterwards. It's the cards that then follow that can become a whole other.
Or it's the focus group. I mean, I was blown away that 4 people in a focus group had a problem with a certain actor or the resolution of that character, and it caused the studio to question it, and they reshot that movie.
And part of it too, to me, because I've been part of really good focus groups, and then I've been part of what I would call very manipulative focus groups. As a filmmaker who edits, who works with a director, often we want to hear what our audiences are thinking. We want to know what their thoughts are. We want to know, what what the studio's thoughts are. Well, sometimes, most of the time. I mean, you're again. I have to say this again. We are in commercial art. We are in a collaborative art form. The people who have made this movie are going to have something to say about it. I think that the best case scenario is they tell you what the problem is, and then they trust you to go figure out how to fix it. I think what's really frustrating is they'll tell you what the problem is, and then they want to give you a lot of agency as to how to fix it. And I think most filmmakers want to know. They want to know if their film isn't working or why isn't working for you. But part of being an artist is wanting to then go into your space and problem solve and find the solutions yourself.
James, did you want to comment on
No,
something?
I was just going to say when Terry was talking about the audience and the feedback and being honest, and it's tricky because when there's a Q&A after a screening, very few people will have insightful notes that they will honestly want to challenge the film or a moment they didn't understand or just flat out hated about the film or whatever, and they don't want to insult the filmmakers, so you don't really get candid responses oftentimes from the audience, and so the cards kind of can flush out more detailed information about it, and you start to see patterns and trends and moments. But the weirdest thing is I sit in the audience in the back, and no one knows I cut the film. And after everyone, almost inevitably after every screening, people want to go to the bathroom before they come back because they know we're in for now the next 35, 40 minutes of Q&A and filling out cards and the whole thing. And I have found that when I go to the bathroom, right away after the screening, the most honest comments are shared in that bathroom that I'm like, that guy said it was great out there. And then we went to the bathroom and he goes, that movie sucks. So it's a weird thing, but I've had it work both hands. And in fact, on one picture I was on, we were having a lot of problems with capturing the tone of the score, which is always really tricky because you're temp scoring and every movie is like a birth of a baby, and so there sometimes aren't parallels for the score that you can temp with. So there were specific moments that we really needed, and we were just having a heck of a time with the score and the composer. And the composer went to the bathroom at the same time because he was sitting next to me, and he heard, that movie's great, but that score is terrible. And he was really reluctant to change it. And I had been talking with him for weeks about shifting the tone and just following my temp because there were notes within the temp that we had already received, and he came on board later. So he was trying to show what he was contributing to the film, but it was actually he was working in the wrong area, the wrong way. What he needed to do was build on what we already had and then develop his voice out of that. And it wasn't until we went to the bathroom and he came back out, and to his credit, he was the one who stood up and said, okay, let's hear it from the audience. What'd you guys think of the music? Same silence, crickets.
Wow.
And he knew. And that was a really pivotal moment that we no longer had any more battles. We were able to get on the same page rather quickly. But I give him credit for, being the lone wolf and wanting to try it his way, but it just wasn't meshing with the tone of the movie and the story that needed to be told. So that's a really odd thing to find out the truth when you go to the bathroom and you hear people murmuring and talking about your film.
Susan,
I was just
for television and pilots, are you involved in focus groups, or you have any stories about
It's less
focus
groups, but it's that age-old, like, you recruit an audience to sit in a screening room, and they have these dials, and they basically are supposed to track their emotional response to the project, and then they'll actually print out those graphs of, like, when the audience was happy and when they were, when they didn't like it, and the problem is that you have to get the right people who can interpret that, because they'll be like, that was the lowest moment in the graph, and it's like, because it's the lowest moment in the story, like, and
what's your least favorite character? The villain?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I remember on the pilot of Grey's Anatomy, a producer came in and he was just like, get rid of the mother, which was sort of the subtextual driving foil to the main character, like through several seasons. And thank God we did it. But then sometimes you get those good notes, like the head of the network, who at the time was like, you need a bro. And I was sort of offended by that note. I was like, this is awesome women surgeons, and but that's what resulted in the character of Alex Karev, who had one of the greatest arcs, which, I mean, he's gone from the show now, but for 15 seasons, his arc was amazing and so fun to cut. So that was a great note. But yeah, just knowing the people reading the note behind the note is
the note behind the note. But also, you're the filter, and the director's the filter.
Yeah.
And it's really about taking in all of that and deciding what is in service to the story, what is in service to the best version of that film.
Yeah. Especially in TV, there's so many people who want to give feedback, and you get these documents, from half the studio and the network. And the producers very often just don't even, they'll be like, we tried it, it didn't work. I feel like I'm the one person who can try it, and it doesn't cost me anything to try it. And what I can find is that the note that they're giving, it actually can be fixed in a different scene. That if we heighten the tension in an earlier scene, then we're gonna, feel this other person's, that why aren't we feeling their regret more, if we change the temp music. And so sometimes the note that's being suggested, there's a different way to fix it. And that's usually my approach at looking at notes, because I think, there's often something valid.
We're going to play a clip that Susan suggested now. Max, can you take the lights down?
My editing process is an intuitive process. It's what feels truthful, it's what feels strong, and it's what works. Now, you hear this from a lot of editors. I mean, Dee Allen always used to say to me, I cut with my gut, and she's right.
There's a mismatch here, and I'm going to have to determine whether this is a problem or not, because Brown is looking toward camera, but when we cut, he's looking up off to the left. We can have Jeremy come in and cut so that Jeremy's head is masking Brown's head, so that the mismatch is not seen. And now I'm going to mark this frame, and I'm going to get rid of this area, which is 1, 2, 3 frames. And now I'm going to look at it in context and see how it looks. Good. You have to have the personality that enjoys that. It's almost like making little pieces of jewelry, that patience of the individual shots and how they're crafted together. But at the same time, you have to have an appreciation for the larger picture and how these shots fit into the larger picture of the scene, and then how the scene fits into the larger picture of the sequence, and how the sequence fits together with the larger picture of the whole work, and then how the work fits together with society. So it's a boxes within boxes within boxes.
In the 1930s, movies became an even bigger business. The movie studios introduced sound films and radically reshaped movie making. Hollywood retooled itself on the model of the factory assembly line. The studios cranked out movies with almost the same speed that Henry Ford mass-produced cars. I don't want it good, Jack Warner declared. I want it Tuesday.
You now needed an industrial system to make this all work. In the first 20, 25, 30 years of cinema, large numbers of editors were women. It was considered to be a woman's job because it was something like knitting, it was something like tapestry, sewing, that you took these pieces of fabric, which is what film are, and you put them together. It was when sound came in that the men began to infiltrate the ranks of the editors, because sound was somehow electrical. It was technical. It was no longer knitting.
There is the soundtrack, which might be several tracks, and the image. And without the happy marriage of those two, you're not using every bit of potential that you possibly can in editing a movie.
So, Susan, why did you pick that clip?
Well, I admire Walter Murch so much. But in the 20 years since Cutting Edge was made, there's actually been a fair amount of scholarship on women editors in the film industry. And it's of just particular interest to me, having really had to seek out women editors to work with when I was an assistant editor. And so it was kind of wonderful to start. I did a talk with Bobby Osteen, who writes a lot of books about editing, and she's a great champion for editors. And we just kind of like went through some of the history and basically found that there was like an incredible number of innovative, technically, like literally defining the technical style of editing, like Elisabetta Salova, who cut Man with a Movie Camera. Has anyone seen that? You know that one? And it's frequently on like top 10 lists of the best movies ever made. And in 1929, she was doing like crazy visual effects, you know, just like split screens with like different shots going in different directions, stop motion animation, reversing frames, slow, all these things that at the time were considered, they were like, what? That's hacky. That's not that perfect kind of invisible editing. But she really pushed the envelope. And then she actually started editing at age 14 and edited till 1947. Viola Lawrence cut her first film in 1917 and then became the supervising editor at Columbia until 1960. She cut Orson Welles' Lady from Shanghai. Anne Bouchens cut 43 films for one director, Cecil B. DeMille, including The Ten Commandments. And she was the first woman to win the Oscar for editing in 1940, which was the same year the LA Times published an article saying vanishing lady cutters or something, saying that like women were leaving. And I think the sort of common idea was, oh, the sound was technical, and you know, and to be honest, sound is still a very male-dominated part of the industry. I would love to see that evolve a bit more. But I found it so interesting that Walter Murch described what he did as making jewelry, and then he described what the female editors doing was knitting. I think they were making jewelry also, and so I wanted to bring that up because there are these amazing women from the golden age of Hollywood, and they didn't vanish in 1940. You know, Margaret Booth worked till 1986, starting in 1924.
And Verna Fields.
And yeah, well, and so then there was Dorothy Spencer. She cut all of John Ford's movies, not all, but Stagecoach, My Darling Clementine. She was known for cutting action. And then like Bobby McLean, who was like she was the chief editor at Fox from 1936 to 1969. So this period that's sort of mythologically known as like the women vanished. They didn't. and the reason was largely, yes, they dropped in numbers, but it was more because of the Great Depression. And to be honest with you, I feel like we're seeing a tiny repeat of that after the strikes. I know many more women who are unemployed than men. Sometimes that has to do with gatekeepers. I'm just being honest with you guys about what the industry is like. So yeah, there's probably more female editors going into debt right now than male editors, but that doesn't mean there's no female editors. And that's one reason why I helped start that Slack channel for us to support each other and put out great job listings and things like that.
Did you talk about Cafe?
Yeah, no, it started as an email right after the Me Too moment happened. And there was suddenly, a veil lifted where producers were like, oh, we should hire some women. And so there's this one editor, Jamie Nelson, who was cutting on Blackish, and she was also a producer on it, and she's just Kenya Barris's just everything editor. But because she was so well known for Blackish, she won an Eddie for that. She was the one that people would always go to. And she sent an email out to about 20 women editors, and she said, I'm so sick of people calling me and saying, it's so hard to find a female editor who can cut comedy. And she's like, and I don't want to have to email you guys individually, so I just want to create an email group where I can just, reply all to you guys and let you know that this team is looking for a female comedy editor. And it was just such a great thing. And I'm just a feminist and activist and networker, so I kind of nurtured it a lot. I was constantly like putting job listings on there. A friend of mine who just was Emmy nominated for What We Do in the Shadows got that job because I wasn't able to do it. And I was like, here, I'm putting it out out there, go get it. And so it was, we all saw the growth. I was on a show called Space Force, and I was the only woman there, and they were like, we need another editor. I was like, I'm only putting that out to the email. It was originally called Calling All Female Comedy Editors. So by the time Hacks came around, we'd all started adding more people to it, and it got to a group of about 50 or 60, and it was mostly TV and mostly comedy. And I got nominated for an Emmy for the first time for Hacks, and I was suddenly at the Emmys and on a text chain with like Amy Duddleston and Nona Kadai, who were like nominated for Mayor of Easttown and WandaVision, and Michelle Tesoro for The Queen's Gambit. But because they were drama editors, they weren't on this email chain. And I was like, this is so stupid. And so, and then all the women from Black Lady Sketch Show that won that year, that was so amazing. And so I just started I was like, hey guys, I'm going to start adding a lot of people to this. And we realized that the email was not the best way to do it. And so a few months later, we ported it over to Slack, and it's just been wildly successful. And at first it was just for editors, but it quickly went up to 200 members in about a month. And then there was a real frenzy for assistant editors. And so our job leads channel wound up being just people looking for assistant editors. So assistant editors eventually started coming in. It's literally just self-organized, and it's just a very beautiful space. It's people are constantly grateful for it.
Well, thanks for putting that on. I want to do another clip. Max, if you can take the lights down.
Moving, beautiful. If we had cut it, it would have destroyed everything.
Editing is like poetry. It has to do with rhythms. It has to do with visual. It's visual poetry.
The digital revolution has further enhanced the poetic powers of the editor. George Lucas, who began his career as an editor, is one of the pioneers of this new technology.
All art is technology. That's the very nature of it. The artist is always bumping against that technology. And the advent of, whether it's a new color of blue, whether it's a proscenium arch, whatever it is, it changes the way we work in that art form.
With computer technology, editors now can make changes within the frame, adding or removing elements from the original image. This increases the editor's control, but also multiplies the number of decisions to be made.
Now you can edit what I call in 3D, which is you have a scene and you have people in the scene, and you can cut those people out, you can move them around in the scene, you can go in for a close-up, you can go out. You can sort of direct the film in the editing room, which is, growing up as an editor, what I've always wanted to do.
The new technology also makes it possible to cut the movie before shooting begins. Pre-visualization gives an editor much more input in planning the movie.
And I have a system now, because of the digital world, I have a group of kids really do little videomatics of things, and we have a little blue screen. We can send these editors in and shoot scenes on just an amateur video camera. And so I can actually shoot the film and make the film and write the film right there in the editing room. Every main character in our movie has a digital counterpart. We have totally virtual actors now, and we use them quite a bit. Mostly we use them for stunts and things. And we have a lot of situations where it's better to use a digital actor than it is to use a real actor. Christopher Lee is 80 years old. He can't really fight the way he did in Attack of the Clones. You're not going to get an artificial intelligence computer that's neurotic enough to be able to understand how you create a performance. Performance is an art.
At the end of the day, all this stuff has to work to tell a story. And if you're not telling a story, it doesn't matter how much razzle-dazzle there is. It's not about the tools, it's about the story.
So this was 20 years ago. Pre-visualization has gotten very sophisticated now. Digital twins. I mean, look at Fast and Furious, 15. Paul Walker was recreated from outtakes and things like that. Can you speak about how Lucasfilm is using previs?
Yeah, well, I mean, I chose this clip because I work with Dave Filoni, who was trained by George Lucas, so it's like 1 degree of separation from me to him. But what George was talking about 20 years ago, which was a modern day way of storytelling, which traditionally a lot of directors use storyboards. And we use pre-visualization, motion capture, previs, the whole thing, so that we can actually go and lay the show out completely before we go to camera. And because these shows are so expensive and so intricate, and you're creating worlds and all these things that don't exist, you really need to have an idea of what is capable of being executed, and also to give you a sense of what the story really is, and if every department's on the same page of what we're trying to do. And ultimately, there is a budget consideration for it too, because pre-visualization can come up with amazing material and shots, but the shots might not be affordable for us depending upon where we're shooting it on the stage and the volume or on the location. So you have to have everybody in sync, and that's why it takes so long for some of these high budget, like heavy visual effects shows, movies, to be made, because they have to go sort of into the lab to be worked out first before you can actually go to camera.
Do most of you know what the volume is when he talks about the volume? How many people know what the volume is?
A virtual set, virtual stage.
Okay.
Terry, did you use any virtual production or stuff on Woman King?
I mean, yes. I mean, I think that we had, and I was curious as to whether you use storyboards anymore, because on Twisters we had everything. We had storyboards, we had animatics, we had pre-visualization. And the thing that I would say about, and it's so funny because I just had a conversation with the previs supervisors today, which, by the way, I mean, when we talk about opportunity in post-production, and I'm often telling, young people who are interested in editing that, the good news and bad news is, I guess, is that there's no one way to get into the editing room. There's a lot of different pathways to pursue editing. And often now, because the industry is changing and the opportunities, especially right now, are we're going through something right now in this town. But I'm always encouraging even young people who are interested in assisting and editing is gather the tools in your toolbox. If you have an opportunity to get in as a visual effects PA, visual effects assistant, do it. I mean, it's just another way to gather tools and move through. And the same thing, I think, with pre-visualization, and that artistry is quite incredible, because and often, as I would say, as an editor, often, and it has to do with certain studios using previs like the Bible. Mm-hmm. That they're literally, there's this expectation within certain studios that what you're prevising is exactly the way it's going to be not only shot but edited. And so for me as an editor, I personally like to get into previs very early in those conversations, because though previs can give you the roadmap, it can give you the foundational idea of what this scene's going to be. Often what previs doesn't give you is the humanity of the scene, or why the characters are moving through this, this fight scene or this dogfight or whatever that is. And so it's important to make sure that if you're in a position to bring in that humanity to the pre-visualization, you're doing that. Not to mention that often the budgets are determined by what the previs is doing. And so, I've had a situation where I cut a scene and, the visual, effects producer will come to me and say, well, we didn't account for these many cuts. Mm-hmm. We didn't budget for this many. Mm-hmm. These shots are close, whatever it is, a close-up or medium shot. It's and my response is, well, what were you looking at when you were making this budget? And 9 times out of 10, yes, they look at the script and they're deciding how many times I might cut to a character, And so in that kind of and if that's the case, then me as an editor, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to start making decisions at that point, we need to talk. A film evolves, from the moment from the script to what they're shooting. And yes, the previs is absolutely a guide. It's a roadmap. But for me, it's not the Bible.
No, not at all.
Right.
I think it has a lot of value to it, because you can get a sense of what the story is capable of being and what the budget will allow for. Yeah. But it should not be understood for the crew who's going to execute the story or for the producers or the director that that is the gospel, that that is a one-to-one translation. Because when the actors go to shoot it, like Terry was talking about, they're going to take their time with all the beats. There's going to be emotion that doesn't exist in the previs. You can only get so much out of the previs, which honestly, the thing about the temp ADR helps elevate the previs. And the temp ADR from AI, if you had the actors' voices that you actually could use, would improve it even more. But those are ethical things that lots of directors and producers are just like, no, we are still using our people the way we used to do it, and so they're not ready to do that yet. At least not the people I work with. We don't use AI for that reason. But to your point, it is just a starting point to go, okay, when we go to camera, these are the essential shots we're going to want to get.
Yeah. So an example for that is I worked on Three Rivers 25 years ago, and there was a very complex car chase scene in a tunnel. Car chases and crashes and things like that are very expensive. So prevising that whole car chase scene saved them a tremendous amount of money. They knew exactly what shots the stunt people had to do, and it worked. They actually played the previs on set and looked at, okay, we replaced that shot, we replaced that shot, we replaced that shot, and the actual movie is nearly 90% of what the previs of that particular sequence was. So it made sense there.
Yeah. And there's also post-viz. I mean, we haven't really talked about post-viz, which is a whole other part of that process is that when you start working on the cut, having those artists also available to you. Because to be perfectly honest, on Twisters, we were 2.5 weeks before we were wrapping principal photography, and there was an actor strike. So we didn't have the entire film, and yet we also had a release date that we had to meet, and they weren't going to move the release date. And I had literally every single reel of that film had some part of the film that had not been shot. And so our previs, our post-viz, our storyboards became these placeholders until we were able to actually have the entire film. We had like assistant taking on everybody's character so that we could bring a voice and at least try to bring life to the things that we didn't have yet.
I did a preview of The Invisible Man, the most recent one, with previs in some of the visual effects shots. And before we showed the movie, we had a primer about green screen. When you see this guy walking around in a green suit, it's really this character. And it totally ruined the preview. It took people out. And you know, when you cut from a real movie to a previs, it just didn't work. I'm going to show another clip now.
Or a fright. Everything's manipulated. And some people say, well, this director, he's manipulated the audience. Well, that's so naive because that's all we do is manipulate.
After World War II, Hollywood continued to make movies in the same way it had before the war. Although editors were now unionized, they were viewed for the most part as highly skilled mechanics.
There was a man named Owen Marks. He edited The Petrified Forest, Casablanca, Treasure of Sierra Madre, East of Eden, and his films are immortal, and the man is completely unknown. And it's sort of symbolic of the way editors have been ignored in the literature about Hollywood.
Editors worked on cutter's row and were expected to conform to the established rules of editing.
If we were to think about the films that were being made, there was a certain film language that was very, very distinct. Certain kinds of coverage, long shot, two shot, single. There was almost a formulaic way of presenting films. This film language was very strict. And in editorial terms, there were rules that one felt could not be broken.
A master shot had to come first, and then if you had an over-shoulder, you went to the over-shoulder, and you never went to the close-up till you'd done the whole dance coming from far to close.
For instance, if you were going to have a transition from one place to the next, it would be done with a dissolve.
Next thing you've got to remember is that a gentleman you meet among the cold cuts is simply not as attractive as one that you meet, say, in the mink department at Bergdorf's.
In the 40s and 50s,
The audience would expect the character to drive up, show him getting out of the car. He would walk up to the building, and then he would open the door, and then the editor would match cut the door opening on the other side, and he would walk in and come over and sit down.
Pull up a chair. Thanks.
It just seemed to me absolutely stupid that you had to show somebody coming down the stairs and all the way across the road and up the other side. I mean, you knew that they were coming from here and they were going to there. Why couldn't you just cut directly?
Oh là là, Michel?
Je peux entrer?
Oui.
In France, a group of film critics turned directors also challenged the doctrine of invisible editing and launched a revolution among editors.
When I first saw the French Nouvelle Vague, I instantly loved it. I loved the idea. I loved the way they edited and thought I would like to cut like that.
J'aime une fille qui a une très jolie nuque, de très jolis seins, une très jolie voix, de très jolis poignets, un très joli front, de très jolis genoux.
You know, Godard used jump cuts because it was like, well, why not? You know, there's nothing interesting happening in this middle part, so let's just go to a jump cut.
When I saw Breathless, I was staggered at Godard's brutality.
What they brought to editing was a breaking of the rules. Whatever books that said this is how it had to be done, they burned them.
Breathless is too hip for me. I come from Lower East Side. I'm an Italian-American guy. It's too beatnik. It's like, you know, bohemian. It's too cool. I liked it. I don't know what the hell was happening in it.
You know, when I first saw Breathless in the 60s, it's like, wow. I mean, just in the first 5-minute sequence in introducing Jean-Paul Belmondo's character as this petty thief, I mean, every rule was violated in terms of how long to hold a shot, the discontinuity of what was going on, even screen directions, you know, were mixed in. And I thought, like, either this guy doesn't know what he's doing, or he's so confident that he has the grammar of film down that he's trying to show us a new way to use the material he has to tell the story.
There were some films that really changed our perception of what filmmaking was, and certainly it affected what editing was.
Alan, can you comment on Breathless and the French New Wave?
They said it all very well. Didi, Alan said it. Yeah, it was a lot different than looking at a movie from the 30s or the 40s, really, or American movies from the 50s. They were very laid out. They were very structured, and we don't have to do that anymore.
Did you incorporate any of that style in any of your movies after you saw that film?
Always. Not necessarily. Well, that's before my time a little bit. I mean, I was a watcher, but I wasn't a practitioner of editing. When I worked with Bob Fosse, we treated time as kind of a relative thing. The composer, Ralph Burns, who did Bob's movies, said to me one day, there's flash forwards and there's flashbacks, and then there's Fosse time. And we edited our movies in Fosse time. We just felt the audience will catch up. If they don't get it, they'll get it later. And if not, we're in trouble, but what the heck, we can fix that. But that never happened.
So that was a clip that you picked, James. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I first started, I have a journalistic background, so I didn't know all the rules. So I was just cutting for what I thought felt right. And within that structure, I also was coming into the era of the MTV style of cutting, and I was like, oh, wow, so you can break some rules, you can speed things up, you can speed ramp things, you can jump cut through things, and I just wanted to show you guys that, to just encourage you to respect the rules, but also to think outside of the box. That's really what I chose that clip for that primary reason.
Cool. We're going to take questions from the audience now. I'll hand the microphone to Christine, and she'll...
Any questions?
What are some, like, major challenges you guys face, just in general, I guess?
I think breaking those rules with being careful, but you can do it especially when you have had the chance to build trust with someone, and sometimes that relationship is just not going to happen. I mean, the biggest challenges I've honestly had have been toxic workplaces. They do exist. It just makes you really appreciate the magic of the ones that are a wonderful team. I read an interview with Didi Allen where she was just saying that it's like it can be just magic or it can be agony. And that's probably the truth, because I think we care very much. We're artists, and so when it doesn't work out, when a job kind of doesn't go the way you want it to, you have to pick yourself back up, go for the next one.
I would say that in terms of moving through the industry, and I have to say that, as I was coming up through the industry, there weren't a lot of people that looked like me that was doing what I'm doing now. And I think that, I joke about how when I first moved into the chair, part of it is we work in a discipline, a craft, and at a certain point you earn the right to move into the chair. And I remember my first early interviews, I would go in and I had a name like Terilyn Shropshire, and I think they expected someone like Dee Dee Allen, who looked like Dee Dee Allen, to walk in, and it was me. The lessons that I try to talk about with people that are coming up is there's this expectation sometimes that you feel that people should know who you are, that you assume that they see you the way you see yourself. And I think the challenge is to put yourself in a position to show people who you are and what you're capable of, and have that confidence and hold on to that, because you're going to have a lot of no's. And, one of the directors I work with a lot is about overcoming the no and moving through the no and finding a way around the no. And it takes persistence. And I have my P's, my patience, persistence, perseverance, because I have about 5 of them, and, positivity, all of it. But I think part of it is reminding yourself, and people think that I get to a certain point in my career and I don't have to worry about that anymore. But what I find is often when I'm going into a situation where I may not have worked with this director before, I kind of walk towards the door. Let's say the director's on the other side of the door. I'm walking towards the door thinking, well, why wouldn't they hire me? Why wouldn't they hire me? Look at why wouldn't they hire me? But the minute I cross that threshold, I have to change my headspace to show them why they should hire me. Why am I the best person for this particular story? Because by the time where I am in my career, by the time I get to that door, there's about a number of other editors who, are has this maybe the same, level of talent, the same type of resume, more or less, whatever. But why am I the person to tell the story with you? Why am I the person to take that journey? And I think that it's really important for you to remind yourself that no matter how confident you are and how you see yourself, which hopefully is something that gives you strength as you get more and more experience, you still have to remind yourself that you have to show people who you are. And so that is very important when you're looking at the challenges that you may face going into any type of interview situation.
How long would you say it took you to learn how was the process of learning the technology to actually edit? So us editing students are having to learn Avid, and it's obviously very daunting because it's such a big and complicated program. So how
it's an ongoing process. Just to give you perspective, because with every innovation with Avid, every one of its updates, every one of its new releases, there's something new to learn. I started on Ahsoka this season, and we're on 2024, and I was working with 2018 primarily because I trusted that version of the software, and I felt like I didn't have time to learn anything new. I knew there was going to be a learning curve, and I was concerned that within that learning curve, if the director's sitting in there with me and I'm poking around trying to remember how do I do this on 2024 when I didn't even think about it on 2018, what's the cost of that time it's going to take in the edit session? But I got it quickly, I think I learned it within 3 weeks. I was really every day I learned something new, but I can say in about 3 weeks.
Where was that thing that I used to know?
There's still stuff that I'm like, why did they move that there? There's no reason to move it there. But, you get it because it's intuitive. And so I know how to tell the story. It's just finding out. And I'm still always asking my assistant, they do things with the title tool, for instance, on Avid that I've never been satisfied from the beginning. And now it's even more complicated. And so I just don't find it to be quite as effective. So I'm still tapping my assistant on the shoulder. Hey, come over here. How do I do this? I want to do this. So, yeah, it takes a time. And then the more important part is, as one of the last editors said, It's not about the tools, it's about the artist. It's about your understanding of how you want to tell a story, your point of view to the story, what you want to get out of it. That's the most important thing, and I think that is a lifelong career of learning, because there's different genres. Susan works a lot in comedy. She had to learn to understand the principles and the foundation of how to build comedy out, and comedy comes out of drama. So if it wasn't, it would just be SNL sketches. So she has to know drama in order to understand comedy. Terry has worked in multiple different types of genre, action pictures. She's just did Twister, The Woman King, Old Guard, Eve's Bayou, Love and Basketball, all different pictures that I think part of her life experience lends itself over to what she's able to understand about the unique point of view in each one of those stories, and how she's able to, and myself as well, probably all of us, draw upon our experiences from what we've learned on other pictures or projects or whatever it is to carry it forward.
My question is on the breaking the rules. Where do you guys set a line in terms of respecting and understanding that the audience will get the jumps you're making? Or when you break those rules, knowing that they're going to understand it?
I always remember a statement. Cameron Crowe did an extensive interview with Billy Wilder, the great director, and it's called Wilder on Wilder. I think it's a wonderful book. And in it, Billy Wilder says, if you let the audience add up 2 + 2, they will love you forever. And I think that's what Alan was talking about with all that jazz opening, which is almost every editor's most watched sequence of. It's brilliant. And it's okay to be confused, because it's not about tracking it perfectly. I also just did an interview with Myron Kirstein, who edited Wicked. And I encourage you all to see it. It looks flawless. It, was a journey. And he said, when they went down in the downtime because of the strikes, he took that time and he's like, I intentionally broke the movie. And he's like, and John Chu came back and he's like, I want to show you something. I broke the movie on purpose, and it's going to scare you. And that just means he did some really dramatic changes or reorders or tried things, And when I started out editing, I always said, my editing room, this is the place where we try things. There's no bad idea. It's a safe space. Failure is good because we learn from it. And I just loved that story that Myron told me, because he's like, yeah, it was crazy. It was the crazy version of the movie, but there were things that we found in there that were gems. And so you just gotta, it's like mining for gold. You gotta go through a lot of stuff, gotta break the rocks, to find the gold.
I do want to say, though, to your point, one of my mantras is forget what you know. Part of being an editor, part of being a filmmaker, is that you are the first audience. You are the audience to your film. You're the audience to the dailies the first time you watch the dailies. And so in some ways, it's like when you say, how do you know? I mean, to some degree, you have to allow yourself to forget that you are the person who did it and try to kind of rediscover that ability to look at what you're doing in a kind of fresh way. And it's challenging. It's a really challenging thing to do. I rely also on my team, my assistants, who are often my sounding boards. They're not just in there just doing the work. They're often the people I call in, and I won't tell them why I'm bringing them in, and I may have them take a look at something. Allow the people around you to help you with that as well.
Alan, can you talk about mentoring and how you brought people into your cutting room and let them play with the movie or break it? And
well, it's interesting because several of the people up here were my assistants. At one time or another. Craig McKay was, and Richie Marks. Richie Marks was actually my apprentice on a documentary I did. These were people who had the stuff, as it were. Craig talks about cutting with your gut, and that's incredibly important. But the question again exactly.
Mentoring.
Oh, mentoring. Yeah, I've always, on every film I've worked on, I've tried to find a place to have my assistant cut some scenes, because people will not learn unless they're cutting. It used to be, again, I seem like historically here, but when I worked on film and my assistant was in the room with me, and they would hand me pieces of film because they knew what I was thinking. We'd have it set up, and I would pick things that I wanted, put them on pins. It all sounds very mechanical.